So Jay, so what are the common self-imposed barriers that individuals face, when striving for success, and how could they identify and overcome these obstacles to achieve their goals?
I got to tell you something. That's a great question, and let's start with a handful of them. In the book I wrote, 10 Toxic Traits That Keep You Broke, Busted, and Disgusted, I wanted to take a closer look at these progress inhibiting behaviors. So barriers, traits, they have the same effect. I can tell you that probably, I mean, they're all equally detrimental. But I think just to kind of give you a trailer of the answer, the first one is really having a not knowing who you are, having what I call an identity crisis. Now, I don't mean a gender crisis. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that lingo. What I mean is you don't even know who you are. And when you don't know who you are, in terms of not your name, not where you grew up, but who you are, what makes you tick, what gets you excited, what gets you discouraged, what is it that you enjoy doing, what is it that you don't enjoy doing, what are your talents, what are your skills, what is it that you have no business getting involved in, and what is it that you have all the business because you're called to do that. When you don't know who you are, you become whoever else somebody says that you are. When you don't understand what your genetic makeup is, what your academic makeup is, what your DNA is, then somebody else is going to mold you to fit their narrative. Does that make sense? So I think the first problem is not knowing who you are. That's a barrier. And oftentimes we know that's the case because people end up, with regards to relationships, they end up getting involved with the wrong person, whether it's a romantic relationship, a business relationship, and you only find out that it wasn't supposed to, that you weren't supposed to do that when it falls apart, or you're struggling to make connection, you're struggling to find fulfillment. Well, heck, you weren't supposed to be with that person. You weren't supposed to get hooked up with that business partner. It just wasn't that person. You weren't supposed to be with that person. Well, you didn't take time to do self-introspection, to know enough about yourself, to know who I am and who I am not, in order to make good decisions as to who's the right person for you to get involved in or to allow in the circles of your life. That's a big, big barrier because it leads to discouragement, depression, and disappointment, and self-doubt. Huge barrier, Steve.
I want to ask you, Jay, because you bring up a great point about knowing who you are. And, I spent a long time in corporate America. And, my experience in corporate America is you have to wear a mask. You have to behave a certain way, or you risk getting fired or not promoted or whatever their agenda is. So it forces you to behave a certain way. Once I went out into business ownership, I was able to more so find myself. But how does a person go about finding out who they are so they could really amplify that? What would you recommend they do?
I think, that's a great question because people live their lives as wandering generalities. The entire lives, they just wander. It takes time to ask tough questions. I would encourage anyone to do something that I think most people either don't have the time to do it or they don't care to do it because they don't like the answers, or it's going to disrupt their paradigm. And when we're so comfortable living a paradigm, even if it's not the ideal one, we don't want to rock that boat because we're used to those things. But in order for you to really disrupt that, you have to ask yourself tough questions. And I'm going to give you the trailer answer to that. But one of those tough questions or one of those introspective questions is, what do I like? What is it I don't like? If I were going to design me, what would that me look like? So take a third person position and say, this guy, Jay Maymi, or this guy, Steve Spiro, if I am going to identify with that guy, Steve, who does that guy, Steve, need to be? What are his traits? What are his personalities? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? What does he like? What does he don't like? What is he willing to compromise? What's he not willing to compromise? Until you get so crystal clear on who that person is, who the image is, And then you could begin to mold yourself. If you're very close to that profile, wonderful. But the further away you are, the more inner work you're going to have to do to align yourself with that vision of the person who you feel you are, but you are far from. That's the work. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, most people are wandering generalities, guys, because they don't ever arrive at the realization of their identity is off the charts. Their identity is not even in the same space that it should be, but then they don't take the time to do the work, to ask tough questions. And then once they get those answers, do the work to change, because the paradigm that they're living in, it's a comfort zone.